Three fantastic guests today who are going to talk around the subjects of politics and publishing through each of their journeys to being published. Okay. I'm just going to ask them each to tell their stories, as it were, and then after that we'll have a short discussion. It'd be great if you have questions to join in. I think this, from us standing outside, I think it's quite good that we are all quite chatty and kind of keen to talk about the subject, so I think we should keep that feeling going. I think so, isn't it? All right, so first I'm going to give the mic over to Lesley, and she's going to start with publishing and the way of publishing and what she feels, it's all about from her point of view.
Thank you. Hi. My route to publishing came really. I used to be a teacher. I was a primary school teacher for 20 years. It seemed natural to me to want to write for that junior age range, which is what I write for. So sort of 9 to 12. Although my next one is really, that's out next year, is going to be quite 10 less. I found that when I started to try to be an author, because I'm not one of these people who wants to write, for the love of it. I wanted to be published. And I originally wrote a manuscript that didn't get anywhere, and if you read it, you wouldn't be surprised. It was twee, it was overwritten, it was my agency, I would now have turned it down. It just wasn't great. And through an MA I did at Bath's Bar, I did that. It sounds really cheesy, but I found my voice and I found what kind of writer I am. And it was very much, for me, another cliche, like write what you know. So as soon as I started to write about my people, which are South Wales Valley people, and the communities that I grew up in, even though all my books are set in the past, nothing much changes in the valleys. And the older I get, the angrier I get, the more political I get, and that all is like in my books, but filtered, hopefully, appropriately, the age range. So I really like to talk very much about the working class experience from an own voice point of view, because I find that sometimes the middle class publishing world gaze is very much we're all poor and struggling, and we're really not. And I want to get that across with hopefully entertaining books.
Hello everybody, I'm Pillainayagam and I write contemporary young adult novels. So my kind of route to publishing really just came from the desire to tell a specific story. So I'll take you on a little journey. In 2016, as you probably all remember, Donald Trump became the President of the United States of America. And my eldest son, who's just about to turn 13, but at the time was about 7, came home from school and said that someone at school had said to him, "We can't go to America because Donald Trump doesn't let brown people into America." And there was all this kind of playground talk, because at the time Trump had kind of closed the borders to Muslim countries. And kids don't really understand what politics are, why these kind of conversations are being had, and they kind of boiled it down to this kind of very anti-brown, anti-Muslim sentiment. And it kind of turned into this conversation about my kind of mixed race child saying to me, "Am I white? Am I brown? What am I? What does this mean?" It was the first time that he'd really kind of come across this idea that, you could be different in a bad way. And he kind of came in from school and we had this conversation, and I went to bookshops and I looked for sort of things that could help me to sort of have these conversations. And what that really led me to was kind of realising that nothing really had changed that much since when I was kind of growing up. I sort of grew up not seeing myself anywhere really, never seeing a kind of mirror for my experience, or just seeing a book with somebody that looked like me on the cover, or a name that didn't sound, atypically English. And so I kind of sat down and wrote the book that I wished I had at 15, that would have kind of soothed my soul a bit and made me feel like I wasn't alone. So I kind of wrote the book, not like Lesley to get it published with, but just because I had to write it, and I just wanted to kind of get it out. And then when I wrote it and it was there, I thought, oh well, you know, maybe I'll just give it a try and just see if any agents are interested. And, you know, I was really lucky that somebody was, and then I kind of went that really traditional route to getting it published. So that's my story.
That was really beautiful. I don't know if I can follow that. Hello, I'm Cerrie Burnell. I am a children's author, and I've been writing I've been published for 10 years. And like Lesley, I definitely wanted to be published as well. But I will just tell you the reason why I feel like I've always been a writer, sort of in my heart, I think, since I was really, really little. And I had lots of different jobs and careers in between that, from telesales to being on CBBS. So you know, like many of us, I've done lots of different things in the creative industries and beyond. But thinking about seeing ourselves in books and storytelling, obviously, you know, I'm disabled, I've got one hand, so growing up, I desperately wanted to be the girl in the fairy tale. I wanted to be Cinderella, Rapunzel, Red Riding Hood. And at that time, none of those girls were depicted as being disabled, but that didn't stop me, because no 4-year-old is ever stopped by, you know, the fact that they're not in a story, they just put themselves into the story. So one day I was at play school having a lovely time, and we decided to play a game of Peter Pan. And I should add that at the time I had a prosthetic that looked very much like a hook. Now, not my choice, not my parents' choice either, the doctor's idea. I don't know why anyone thinks it's a good idea to give a 4-year-old a hook, but that's what they thought. Anyway, we were playing this game, and I said, I want to be Wendy, and someone else said, no, Sarah's being Wendy. And I said, oh God, who am I going to be? I want to be Tinkerbell. And they said, no, Laura's being Tinkerbell. And I said, well, who can I be? What do you think my friends said? You can be Hook. And I was very upset about this, and I ran away and hid under the table, and then I came back and I said, I'm going to be Tiger Lily. And no one dared argue with me. But I never forgot that moment of feeling like, why can't I be either a fabulous female pirate, or why can't I be Wendy, or why can't I be a fairy? Why cannot I see myself anywhere in the pages of these fairy tales? And, you know, life went on, and I became a presenter on CBBS, and then I became a parent, and I have a beautiful dual heritage daughter with fabulous afro hair. And when she was born, I rushed out into bookshops thinking, great, let's find some books that have families in that look like mine. You know, a white solo parent mum, a mixed race baby, maybe even a disability thrown in for good measure, who knows. Couldn't find any, and all the ones I found were all issue books. Do you know what I mean? They were all like, let's talk about families. And you know, no one wants to read that at bedtime. So that really was my motivation for, or she really, you know, becoming a mother was really my motivation for me becoming an author. My route to publishing was that I was, sorry, I know this is turning into a one-woman show, but I was on CBBS at the time, and so I had a very unique in to publishing. I had sort of become the first, or one of the first visible presenters with a limb difference on children's telly, and so from that springboard it was fairly easy to find an agent, or she found me actually, and then go to publishers. So I'm aware that I had quite a privileged route in, because the brand of CBBS is, you know, it's enormous. But the stories that I wanted to tell were quite different to what the publisher had initially wanted, I guess, in that they wanted sort of sparkly, pretty, lovely books from Cerrie. And you know, my first story is essentially about a little girl who goes into care. So I went to the publisher, the door was opened, I had my way in, but then I did something kind of quite different to what was expected. The show is now over, okay.
Thank you to all of you. So, these stories are not unusual because I think most new authors and illustrators have similar passions, they're driven by the same things. But I want to know, what was it in particular that you found were hurdles that that related to you and how you are? What were the difficulties that you found as you got on this publishing treadmill, as it were? I'll start with Kristen.
I think one thing that was quite interesting, which I kind of notice more now looking back on it, was that when I initially went on my kind of what we call querying, so when you're initially looking for an agent, you basically send out, maybe you all know this, but you basically send out a kind of email to like agents that are kind of representing authors that you like or you admire, and you send them a letter about the kind of book that you've written in the first 3 chapters, and you try to kind of get interest that way. And when I sort of went on that journey, I thought what was really interesting was a lot of the agents that I was approaching, like every agent pretty much now, is kind of saying, look, we're looking for underrepresented voices. We're really keen, like, put this in the title of your email and we will read, these are the things we're going to read first. So, mention if you're working class, if you're a person of colour, if you, have some sort of disability, mention it, because we really want to make sure that these voices are heard. And that's really amazing and important and incredible, and it's a conversation we had earlier about this needs to happen. But every single agent, and maybe this is my fault as well for not doing enough research, every single agent that I went to was able-bodied, white, public, private school educated, and so the gatekeepers that were asking for these stories are still the same people deciding whether our stories matter, whether they are convenient and what people want to hear. So I think that was one of the things I found quite interesting about that experience, and I think you can then also push that onto the publishing side as well as you go along, like you kind of seeing this desire for change, but actually the sort of gatekeepers and the structure of it is still the same. There's a lot of goodwill and a lot of desire for change, but that kind of structural change hasn't happened yet to make it really kind of authentic yet. So that would be kind of my take.
If anything stopped me in the beginning, it was that when I mentioned, because it wasn't very good, but no one has ever stopped me because of my background or anything like that. But I think that's got a hell of a lot more to do with my personality than anything, because I'm so proud of where I come from, and I'm aware that not everybody from where I'm from has the advantage of the kind of parents I had who always encouraged me and told me I could do anything, not told me I could do anything because they were unrealistic, but gave me that self-confidence. But what I'm aware of now, when I look at the publishing world, is that what about the people who, it's that thing, isn't it? Talent is everywhere, opportunity isn't. And I'm really quite conscious that, again, letting everyone have the opportunity to tell their story and not having this view of it, that sort of others, everyone, and it's like, oh, I've ticked that working class box, I've ticked that colour box or whatever, and sometimes it does feel a bit like that. I have mixed feelings about positive discrimination. Sometimes it needs to happen for change to happen, but so I've never felt it as a negative. I think everybody loves the Welsh accent, so that suits me. Like everybody, me and my friend Lee Newbury, who's also an author, I'm from Talbot, and I'm from a steel town, and he's from Lesley, and we laugh about it because we say, as soon as you meet an English person, they go, oh, I'm a quarter Welsh, or my auntie married, and you're like, never works the other way around, ever. You never meet a Welsh person who go, oh, I'm 1/16th English, because like, we're not bothered. So, I think it's part, I don't know why I went down that track, but I'll leave it there.
Thank you. So I have been writing for about 10 years, and I think I've been really lucky in that I've been able to sort of choose whatever I wanted to write about, and always found a home for the story. Of course, that doesn't mean that I haven't faced, you know, the tightrope over the uncertainty of the poverty that all writers go through, or, you know, being on submission for ages and not hearing back. But you know, I very much wanted to make a career out of writing, and so because I have worked in other creative industries, I know that you need an awful lot of resilience to withstand it, and that goes for all writers, all published writers really. I think a shift that I've seen that's really interesting is from the point that I started. So I've been published for 10 years, but writing for 12. So 12 years ago, the book industry or the children's book industry was in a really different place. And so I guess I can see that there has been some really wonderful progression, and there are so many more diverse authors coming through than there were. However, I know if we collected the data for that, it would still be quite cold and hard and shocking. But I guess I can see that things have altered and have shifted. Something that I've noticed which is happening recently, you know, sort of disability is a hot topic suddenly, and everyone wants authentic voices, own voices, which is brilliant. And so that means disabled people telling disabled narratives and being able to own their own story, or for any, you know, protected minority, the same thing. One thing I'm just really conscious of is that we don't box people in though and go, you're a disabled author, so you always need to have a disabled protagonist in your story, or you always need to be talking about, you know, being from Wales, do you know what I mean? Or being brown, or whatever your minority is, although actually with disability it's kind of a majority because everyone ends up disabled in the end. Cheers.
Do you think that if the gatekeepers, as it were, as we were all talking about gatekeepers, do you think that they are they solely responsible for things not happening faster, or are they, you know, is it just down to them, or do you think that they are following a certain directive, or do you think that, you know, if you're trying to, I mean, I remember the first time I was published, I didn't experience any gatekeeping, but also I realized that it took a few years for people to realize that the name on the book and the face that they were looking at were actually the same thing, because they were expecting something completely different. And I found that quite funny for a while, and then it was not funny. But, you know, it was only when my career sort of dipped a little bit, and I found that it was much harder to get through that gatekeeping door. Simply because those people didn't know who I was at all, not even that they were being told anything. So I wondered, what do you think about the idea and the concept of gatekeeper in terms of getting new voices out? Is that too deep a question?
I think by the nature of the job, you have to have them, because everyone has their role in the industry, don't they? Whether they're the agent or the marketer or the publicist or the editor, you know, and they have to be there. If you want to be traditionally published, you need those people. The methods by which they open the doors, I do think it's a little bit different for me, because I'm not, I mean, I don't know what the statistics are, I think, but I think, because I'm here to talk about class, I think that it's, you know, not really a minority, which is kind of the thing that almost annoys me sometimes, because so many stories, and there's nothing wrong. I wrote an article for Waterstones when my first book came out, and I said that it's, I forgot what it was. Yeah, it's like, I've completely lost my thread now, you might have to
Minority is majority. Article he wrote, Waterstones.
I'll look it up.
Said you were annoyed about the minority.
Honestly, I've gone completely blank, so I can't remember. I'm so sorry. If I remember it, I'll put my hand up or something. I never do that.
I mean, I think there's kind of gatekeepers in every industry, and I think if we look specifically at anything, you know, like in the media, etc., like there's always been the norm or what, you know, is perceived as norm. I think publishing, specifically children's publishing, I think you're right, it has worked really hard, it is working really hard to kind of change things and to make things, you know, to make sure that children do actually sort of see themselves and like whatever background that they're from, that they actually kind of see that, you know, books are for them, and I think that that's what it is. It's you got it now. But
I'm only a chatty, it's not my problem.
but yeah, I think the kind of literacy bit of children's publishing, which is that we're all just really, really keen to make sure that kids can read really well, because we know that the outcome of children reading for pleasure is that they just have better lives, better quality lives, empathy. That's what's going to lead to like a better world and all of that stuff. So I do think like the kind of gatekeeping in publishing, they're trying to change things. I do think there's a desire and a good, like, you know, a want to change things. But yeah, there's always a status quo, isn't there? There's always, you know, at the end of the day, publishing is a commercial business and they have to sell books. It is not, you know, it's an industry like any other. So I think we also have to be very mindful of that. And it's a lot of that is about trying to get to new audiences and sell those books to people that sometimes publishing think, brown people don't buy books, or, you know, the working class people don't buy books, or whatever it is. And it's just about kind of just doing the work as well as, oh God, now I'm just going on, sorry. But just kind of putting work in and not just going, oh, we're publishing this book, but it didn't sell anything, so we won't publish another one. It's actually about having to do the work of finding that audience and finding those kids that need that book.
I think that's a really interesting point you made about all media having gatekeepers, and you know, I've worked behind the scenes in telly as well on the creative diversity team for the BBC, and I know that, you know, I can't exactly remember the parameters, but if you're pitching an idea, there has to be a certain percentage of your cast, crew or talent that is in some way diverse, and I think although that is quite a crass way of doing it, that change is really necessary, and that is really encouraging. And if you look at some of the, you know, some of the dramas for younger people, sex education, you know, shows like that, you can really see the beauty of that diversity coming through. And Heartstopper is another one where they cast those shows authentically, and they have actors with the lived experience of their character, and I think there's something so beautiful about that portrayal. And, you know, if we aren't writing those books, if we aren't telling those stories and getting them out there, people are going to struggle to put big stories like that on screen. I was really heartened the other day. I watched a show on Netflix called All the Light We Cannot See, not knowing anything about it, and it's set in the war, and I don't even like war dramas. I don't know why I watched it, but the protagonist in the story is visually impaired, and they have cast an actress who is absolutely phenomenal, who is also visually impaired. And I was so delighted to see a young woman being spotlighted by Hollywood in such a positive way. I found it really, really moving, and you know, that is an adaptation of a book, and if those stories aren't being told, the rest of the world can't move on. So at some point, the book industry is going to have to realise that actually we do need more and more of those stories. So I would actually be heartened by the changes that are being fought for behind the scenes by diverse, you know, talent, because I think it's going to trickle down and make things more inclusive for everyone.
Do you remember?
Oh yes.
article and how I wrote about, we were talking about seeing yourselves and then thinking about the gatekeepers. I don't think anybody signed me for, you know, my agent or my publishers. I don't think they signed me like because I was working class or anything like that. I think they, as with all of us, they signed us because we've written good stories. But I was thinking about that article and how I never really felt, I definitely did. I was a grown-up when I saw a kid like me in the story. It's Frank Cottrell Boyce's Cosmic. His dad was a taxi driver. My dad was a taxi driver. And I was like 40 whatever and thought, oh, that's the first time that's happened. And it, like I said, never bothered me because I've been brought up to be really confident. But there was one thing that happened when The Valley of Lost Secrets came out, my first book. A teacher put on Twitter that she'd done a display in the classroom, and it's in Tonopandi in the valleys, and it's an ex-mining community. And I can still cry now when I think about it, because I cried my eyes out when I read this tweet, because one of the children, I don't, if you've seen the front of my book, I really wanted all the terraced houses, you know, on the side of the mountain, on the front of it. Is it? Oh, was that I didn't know it was that. Anyway, you can see the terraced houses going up, and one of the children in Beth's, I've become friends with the teacher, in Beth's class said, who lives in houses that look like ours? They've never seen them. They've never seen houses like that on the front of a book. They've seen castles and mansions and great, write that stuff. But move over for me, because that's what I want to write, you know?
So, I think I want to do is ask Christine about the remark you made when you received the Bradford Bose Award earlier this year. When you kind of said that you didn't think people like you, got published. And do you think that's something which is changing? Do you think it will change? Or do you think that actually, can you tell us what was going through your mind at the time?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So, I kind of, when I won the Bradford Bose Award, I was very emotional. I'm one of these people who can cry at anything. And I guess what I was thinking about was the fact that we have all talked about kind of growing up and whether you see yourself in a book, and you just got emotional talking about a child saying they haven't seen somebody who's lived in a house like theirs. And I think for me, because when I was growing up I read loads, and like for me the library was just such an escape. And YA didn't really exist in the UK when I was a kid. It was all, you read either the classics or you read a bit of Jimmy Cooper, passed around under the desk at school, and that was, sort of like your introduction to kind of adult writing and, sexy times and all that. And I just remember always feeling like I didn't really fit in anywhere, because I wasn't like one of the railway children, I wasn't one of the Little Women, and I wasn't really a Sweet Valley High girl, and I wasn't, and I think that God, I'm getting emotional now, sorry, but I think as you get older, you take that feeling with you everywhere, that you don't quite fit in. So it's that sort of like, am I allowed to be here? And that was, God, I'm sorry, I'm passing it over. But that was what I was thinking of when I got that award. I was like, I am allowed to be here, it's official. I have a plaque with my name on it, and I'm officially allowed to be here. And that was what I was thinking. Sorry.
I think that's exactly the right answer. It's like the minute I always say to people when I'm bringing new authors into publishing or new illustrators, and I can tell that they are trying to write something or illustrate something that they think is going to work for publishing. And my question is always, well, what do you know about publishing at this early stage of your career that you think you can, predict that this is going to work? Why not just go out there and write or illustrate exactly what you go for it? Make, come from the heart and tell us your story, and then we'll take it and shape it and help you find the voice that you've given us. I think that's a much better approach. So, everything is valid. Everything is valid along those lines. I have another question about sort of traditional publishing versus, say, non-traditional publishing, and whether or not you think we can get to better representation if we just publish the stuff ourselves. Let's put it that way. You know, is that something you'd ever consider, or is it, you know, does that, yes, no?
It's not something I ever considered, because I think, I mean, I don't really know a great deal about it, but it seems to me that sometimes, not always, sometimes books that are, do you mean like self-published books?
Like self-publishing or...
I think you need a lot of money to produce a quality book with a good cover and even if it's really well written inside. I have to say my books wouldn't be what they are if I wasn't edited, because plot is like my enemy. I was saying earlier, you know, if I could just write, if Bloomsbury would let me write a whole book where people just talked and ate, that would be lovely, but they make me have a plot, and that's quite annoying. So yeah, for me it was all, and I also think the routes into the bookshops are much easier if you're traditionally published. So I need an editor, I need a marketer, I need a publicist, and that for me, anyway. So, does anybody else?
I actually think TikTok has changed things a lot, and I think Book Talk has really become just an unexpected parallel universe for publishing, which is really encouraging. So there are, you know, well, authors of all ages actually. I'm thinking of one in particular, she's called Hannah Grace, and she's written quite sexy books actually, but they're too adult to be young adult, and they're too kind of set at a university to be taken seriously by adults, so the people reading them are sort of 14-year-old girls. But no publisher initially would publish them because they didn't fit into, you know, there was no sort of space for them in Waterstones. So she self-published, and those books became enormous, and now she's been picked up by, I think, Simon & Schuster or someone, and has a traditional publisher. And that's happened countless times with, especially with YA romances.
Yeah, Rosie Talbot.
Rosie Talbot and oh yes, The Kissing Booth, and which is the one with
So of course she's Welsh, you know what?
there's one that's got a sword with flowers growing around it on the front cover. Oh, anyway, I don't know, that's a very vague description. But I really think that TikTok is reshaping things, and the publishing industry can't control it at all. And so they're having to sit up and listen. I think it's really positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of self-publishing, if you have a story that isn't being picked up by a traditional publisher, then why not? I do think, like, to that point about gatekeepers, if someone goes, oh, we've got that particular book, we've ticked that box and it's just not going anywhere, that's where I think self-publishing is so powerful, because you do have a story you want to tell, and sometimes, you know, that will be the story that catches light because it feels genuinely authentic, which is why a lot of the YA that does really well on TikTok is often written actually by teenagers or people that are experiencing those things, as opposed to middle-aged people like myself writing about teenagers. So that's where I think self-publishing can be really powerful, because it is a route to get into publishing, and it can turn into traditional if you're successful. Yeah.
And I think we shouldn't belittle self-publishing, because you know, there's loads of freelance editors and art directors and designers available. There's loads of sales companies that are looking for new clients. So self-publishing.
Can I ask you a question then? So do you need to fund that yourself? Like, if you're paying, if there are these people out there, but do you have to have the money to be able to pay them to self-publish well?
Yes.
That's
So,
a barrier then.
and I was coming to the fact that the risk is often much greater for a self-publisher, because they're funding it from, you know, from their bank accounts, from their own bank accounts. And so, you know, if the book doesn't make its projected income, let's say, that could be quite a disaster. So it might take a while for the next book to come out. But sometimes over the years, I mean, if we go back in terms of diversity and inclusive publishing, we have Burnell who set up Tamarind Books in the 80s, that she did just that. She noticed things that weren't there. She went out there. She not only produced the books, but she did all the selling herself. You know, she just put them in the car and went to all the air shows that she could. And she became quite a powerhouse. And she still is. She's got lots of fire, even though she's stopped publishing or she's retired from publishing. But that was a good introduction to the fact for the whole publishing community that representation can actually sell. You know, it is good business sense. And I think I was saying it earlier. We're in this experimental phase, a decade of experimentation, where people are trying to find what works and what doesn't work in terms of books about all kinds of people, for all kinds of people. And sometimes you feel like you're in this little beaker being stirred around by all kinds of influences in order to come up with the perfect formula. And so far, there isn't a perfect formula. But there are some very interesting side effects which have come through, which is that audiences themselves have become much more diverse. Children going through schools learn about all kinds of people. So now we have a whole generation or two of young readers that want to read everything from everybody. And you're right, publishing cannot keep up, and it has to. So, you know, I think perhaps with a few more minutes to go, let's try and see if we get some questions. What do you think? Yeah. Any questions? Yes.
I'd actually like to ask Ken a question. I can shout. I wanted to ask about your new imprint that you're heading up, and how you feel having somebody who's been in your position on the other side of the fence, as it were, as a writer, influences perhaps the things that you might look to acquire as an editor and heading up imprint.
Okay, so that's an interesting question. I live a very three-dimensional publishing existence at the moment. In one dimension, I'm an author-illustrator of about 70 books. In another dimension, I own a small independent publishing company. And in the third dimension, I run a big imprint for HarperCollins, which is focused on inclusive publishing, but in a global sense. So my territory is the world. It's not the UK as such. And I've got to think about all these things. I found that actually all of those things help, each one of them is helped by the other two. It's really good to know that I can commission someone like Cerrie to do a book, and at the same time ask people within the office to find out whether people in Venezuela will buy it, if I can put it that way. Or we can make the book perform as best as it can because of the might of a big publishing company. So it's a very interesting and fascinating, totally immersive experience. It's like being locked in a crystal. Everywhere you look, it's looking back at you. But yeah, any other questions?
I can shout. How are you, how are you all as authors feeling about AI?
I think it's worrying for the whole of the human race, not just authors. But in terms of storytelling and having the insight and the lived experience to be able to tell a really particular story, I don't feel I'm worried for the industry. I don't feel personally worried. I mean, AI couldn't have written Succession, for instance. Do you know what I mean? There are certain stories that AI at this point in time just cannot write. I mean, you know, the people at Marvel are probably quite worried. But, you know, I think if you're telling really sort of particular, sometimes delicate, intimate, really personal stories, even if that's on a very, a huge sort of fantastical canvas. If you, the storyteller, have that experience, then I think we'll all be alright, basically. That's what I think.
I think the fundamental problem with AI is that it doesn't actually, artificial intelligence doesn't exist. It's not artificial, it's based on words that she's written, the words that she's written and I've written and Ken's written, and it's an amalgamation of those things, and it's an algorithm that takes from existing writers. And as anybody that writes or is in the creative industry knows, it's hand-to-mouth as it is, right? It's really difficult to exist in this world and pay your mortgage and do everything else without somebody coming along and essentially stealing your work. AI is just plagiarism. It's a really fancy word and it makes it sound really scary. And the thing about AI is, I know lots of people who work in the medical industry, and AI is it has like really powerful, positive impact in lots of industries, but in the creative industry, it's basically just a way of stealing our work. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't really think it's a real thing. I think it's just a way of taking control away from people who already have very little control over their work. So,
what you said totally, what you've all said. But I'm a bit of an optimist, I think, and I think that also as human beings we're really scared of change. So, CDs come out, no one's going to listen to vinyl anymore, and I've got a living room full of vinyl. And also things like, the book was going to die a couple of decades ago, wasn't it? No one was going to read anymore, but we do. So I'm partly, and I agree with everything you said, but I'm also kind of hoping that it's a bit like, the millennium bug, we're all going to die. Perhaps it won't be as bad as we think. Sometimes I think things are like a swing boat and they have to go that far, and then they come back and then they settle somewhere in the middle. Hopefully. But I think by the time the robots completely take over, I'll already be dead, so I'm already
Okay, I think we've come to the end of our session with some fantastic views on AI. I think AI doesn't apply to Africans, sorry. So I want to thank my panelists, Cerrie, Christine, and Lesley for this.
I love the way you say Lesley, your accent is so cool.
All right, and that's it. Thank you very much, everybody.